Are dingoes an essential Australian icon or a dangerous pest? They've been a part of Australia's ecosystem for thousands of years, but people have deeply divided opinions on these apex predators. So, we've called in an expert to the ausgeo studio to sort out fact from fiction by answering your questions. It's time to talk dingoes, as voted by you in our all-new episode of Ask an Expert. Hello and welcome to Australian Geographic's Ask an Expert. Today I'm here with the incredible Dr. Kylie Cairns and we're going to talk all things dingoes. So Kylie, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Yes, tell us about, how you got a passion for dingoes, where your research started, a bit about yourself.
So I've always been a dog lover. So when it came to choosing the topic for my PhD, I really wanted to do something about dogs. And the lab that was next door to the lab that I'd been doing my honours degree was in, they worked on dingoes. So I thought, oh well, dingoes are sort of like a dog, so I'll do that. And I couldn't have been more wrong. As I learned more and more about dingoes, I learned how different they are from dogs. And I guess my passion about them has really grown, and I'm really passionate about conserving them now across Australia.
Incredible. So you've learned a lot. Hopefully you can share all of that with us today. Everyone's so excited to have you on. We had people commenting and demanding that we get the one and only Dr. Kylie Cairns, and we did. So everyone can be happy about that. I'm obviously thrilled. We had a bunch of questions come in through our socials. So on the screen now, you should be seeing our social handles. Give us a follow and feel free to ask some questions throughout the show. Otherwise, I say we jump right in. So our first question comes from TikTok. When exactly is the earliest evidence of dingoes in Australia?
So the oldest fossil that we have of a dingo is about 3,500 years old, and that was found in southwestern Australia in the Nullarbor. So that tells us that dingoes have certainly been in Australia for at least 3,500 years. But it's quite possible that they've been here for longer, and molecular dating studies, including my own, say that dingoes may have been in Australia for about 6,000 to 8,000 years.
Incredible. How did dingoes get to Australia? Blake Falcon Green would like to know.
So they likely came from Asia. So the ancestors of dingoes were early ancient Asian dogs. And they probably travelled with humans, either as a food item or a companion animal to Australia. However, it is possible that dingoes came to Australia without humans. And they may have been the first boat people, so they may have come with humans on boats, or my personal hypothesis is that dingoes came via the land bridge between Papua New Guinea and Australia into Australia.
That's really interesting. So still figuring that one out.
Still figuring that one out,
Yeah,
exactly.
Incredible. Mel Browning would like to know, what are some unique characteristics of dingoes that people might not know about? So we think they're quite similar to dogs, but as you've said, they're not. Are there any physical characteristics that we can kind of see a difference with?
So physically, dingoes have a really clear type. They look like dingoes. If you see a dingo, you can generally tell that's a dingo as opposed to a domestic dog. Some of the features that people may not realise they have they have a range of colours. So a lot of people think that dingoes are just that typical orange, red dingo, but they can be a range of colours. So they can be brindle, so like stripy. They can be piebald with white patches. They can be black and tan. They can be white. And they can also be like ginger with black faces. So that's something that a lot of people don't realise, but is quite unique.
That's really sweet. And are they kind of like all dingoes can be kind of different colours and stuff in like a certain, would you call it a pack, or is it kind of almost location-wise that they get certain looks?
So dingoes can be any colour anywhere in Australia, but we do see more variation in colour in southern and eastern Australia, and it's genetic, the genes that control the coat colour. So you may have more coat colours found in certain packs because that's what their parents had around in their genetic history. But you can be a range of colours anywhere. Mostly we do see more ginger dingoes in like the desert.
Incredible. So Sharona would like to know, how territorial are dingoes?
So dingoes are extremely territorial, as are all canids. They protect their territory and they live in that area with their family group. and they will maintain that territory from other dogs, or if we're talking about wolves, from wolves or coyotes.
Incredible. So dingoes will, you know, kind of have their defense up against other dingoes if it's their territory.
Yeah, so they will mark the boundaries of their territory, and they will patrol it, and they will basically make sure that other dingoes or dogs in the area know that this is their territory by sending those signals. So,
wow,
you know, marking it with their urine or poo.
That's pretty incredible that they've got their little patrols going and everything. Emmy would like to know, do dingoes bark like dogs?
Yes, so dingoes can bark. I think this is a misnomer. A lot of people think that dingoes can't bark, but they absolutely can. But they have a much wider variety of vocalizations that they can do. So they howl a lot. They do snuff barking, which is another type of vocalization. But yeah, they absolutely can bark.
Amazing. So they've kind of got like their own little language that they have different noises for different things.
They do, and the bark that they do is different from the bark that domestic dogs do. So dingoes use it as part of their language. They might use it to communicate, for example, that they're unhappy with an intruder entering their territory, or being aggressive. So if they have pups in a den nearby and they don't want somebody coming nearby, they might start barking. But it's not the same bark as like a domestic dog bark that you might be familiar with.
That's really interesting. Aaron Nolan from Instagram says that he's heard anecdotally that dingoes may be one of, if not the smartest canines in the world. Have there been some official studies on this?
There have been some really interesting studies carried out by the Australian Dingo Foundation in Melbourne, and they did find that dingoes are extremely smart, and they're so smart, in fact, that they can use tools to solve problems.
That is incredible. What sort of tools are they doing? What sort of problems are they solving?
So, for example, there's a video on YouTube, I think, that shows dingoes moving a table so that they can climb on top of the table to access treats.
That's amazing.
And they also can let themselves out of gates, or, you know, let themselves into the fridge if they want to have a snack. So
wow, so food motivated as
very
well.
challenging animals to have.
Yeah, I can imagine. Marath would like to know, are there different types of dingoes?
Yes, so some of my research has been studying the way that there are different varieties of dingoes across Australia, and we found that there are different types of dingoes. So there's 4 wild dingo types. So there's the eastern type that you see in Queensland and New South Wales, particularly in the coastal parts of the states. Then there's a southern type, which is like southern New South Wales down to Victoria. There's a special type called the Big Desert dingo, or the Wilka, that's found in the Big Desert and Narcat part of South Australia. That's quite different from other dingoes. And then there's also the Western dingo, which is basically found in Central Australia and Western Australia and the North.
Amazing. And is the kind of specific one found down SA ways, is it just bigger? Is that why it gets its name?
No, the Big Desert is the location that I first discovered it in.
Amazing.
So that's what we called. But they are quite different, actually, because they live in this mallee scrub land, and they often are quite dark in colour, so black, and they may be more nocturnal because they're sort of living in a very arid environment. They're really cool, those animals, and unfortunately their conservation status is really, they're in peril at the moment because they have extreme levels of inbreeding, and in fact on the South Australian side of the border there's efforts to exterminate them.
That's really unfortunate because they sound very, very special.
Yes.
All right, well hopefully there'll be more efforts into conservation there. Another question from TikTok. Why do you think that we're seeing more attacks? Are there more people, less food, more dingoes, or more media coverage?
So I think it's probably several of those things together. I think that particularly when you're talking about places like Gari, there's a major issue with more people visiting that area, and as we have more people, there's more incidences of habituation, so feeding those dingoes, and there's also more people doing the wrong thing, and that can make it worse for other people that are doing the right thing. So we have more of those people, more food, and then also it's being reported more in the media. Yeah.
So there probably are more attacks, but not because of the dingoes, essentially.
Not because of the dingoes, it's more because of the situation that we find ourselves in, with so many people wanting to visit the special place that is Gari, but it's such a small area. When you have so many people, 300,000 plus people visiting that area every year, it's really hard to manage that conflict with the dingoes and make sure that the dingoes are living a natural life and not relying on the humans for food, and that people are all following the rules as well. It's a really tricky situation for the rangers in that area.
Yeah, and to keep both parties safe as well, I'm
Exactly.
sure.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because we have those issues on Ngari, but we very rarely see reports of attacks on the mainland. And that's because we do have lots of people on the mainland and we have lots of dingoes as well, but they're not living in such close proximity often, and they're not being habituated in the same way.
That's really interesting. So can dingoes be domesticated, and how did Indigenous people live with them?
So I would say that dingoes can't be domesticated, they can be tamed. And that's because domestication is a long-term process where humans are selecting that animal into being something that we want them to be. Yeah. So, being a great food, or being the most perfect couch potato pet, We didn't come to pugs naturally, we created them. So we can't domesticate dingoes unless we're going to go through that long-term process of selecting the best dingo over generations of time. So, but we can tame them, and some people successfully live with them as companions in the house, but they're an unusual animal. They're very challenging, so it's not for everyone. And Indigenous people definitely did live with dingoes through history. And they did that as companion animals. They would often take pups from the wild and then raise them in the camp with them. And they have a really deep relationship. And so I won't talk more about that because I think that's important for traditional owners to talk about instead.
Yeah, gorgeous. So people can reach out to their Indigenous communities and hear those important stories there.
Exactly.
Coral would like to know, is it true that Ngari is the only place left with pure dingoes?
So that's a really common myth, but it's not accurate. So there are dingoes all around Australia that have no evidence of domestic dog ancestry, particularly in a recent timescale. So no. No, there's
Good.
lots of dingoes all around Australia, and when you go out into the bush and you see a dingo, almost definitely it's just carrying dingo ancestry.
Pure dingo.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, we can put that myth to bed. We've busted that. Jane H. would like to know, why are they not as disruptive as introduced cats? Did they cause extinctions when they were introduced to Australia?
Yeah, so that's about the fact that dingoes are a generalised predator. So they eat a wide range of prey and they vary their diet based on what's available or abundant. Yeah. They also target larger, medium-sized animals like kangaroos or wallabies. And those animals are better able to cope with the pressure from a predator. Yeah. At least the type of predation that dingoes have. Whereas cats are a more specialised targeted predator, so they tend to focus on a particular prey type and they will continue to target that prey type for a long period of time. They also target a lot of these smaller marsupials that are more vulnerable to predation. And so that's why you have this different impact from the other, between dingoes and cats. The other aspect about this is time span. So dingoes have been in Australia for thousands of years, at least 3,500. At least
3,500.
Possibly more. And so they have adapted to the Australian ecosystems and the Australian ecosystems and animals have adapted to their presence. Yeah. So like native animals know how to respond to and observe the fact that dingoes are in the landscape and how to avoid them. Whereas cats are novel, so they've only been in Australia for 200, 230 years. And so a lot of the native animals just don't know how to respond to them in the right way, or don't pick up on those signals that cats are in the landscape. So they might smell like cat scat, but they might not recognise that it's a cat and it's a predator, and so they may be even more vulnerable to that. Although there are some really interesting experiments where they're sort of training prey species to adapt to the presence of cats. So hopefully that will, yield some benefits in the future.
Yeah, that's amazing, and a good reminder to, be a responsible pet owner, keep your cats indoors or under surveillance.
Yeah, actually,
look after our wildlife.
I don't think I finished answering that question.
Okay,
so there was a bit at the end about whether or not dingoes have been responsible for the extinctions.
Yes.
So to my knowledge, there are no marsupials or birds or reptiles that are extinct because of the arrival of dingoes. However, thylacines and Tasmanian devils did decline on the mainland following the arrival of dingoes, or around the same time. So, yeah.
Was that, were they already kind of naturally declining, and then the dingoes were just kind of like a last little push, or?
Probably. So
Yeah.
there's been some studies looking at the decline of devils and thylacine on the mainland, and they found that there was a general genetic decline. So their health was declining and they were going into smaller population size for a long period of time. And that probably started around the time of a change in the major climate of Australia, as well as increased hunting pressure from humans, as well as landscape change, because traditional owners did change the landscape using fire in various ways, and using the land to harvest food, and that did have impact on animals like thylacines and devils potentially.
Yeah, interesting. LT56 says, from wildlife cameras, we think we have 4 to 5 dingoes on our property in northern New South Wales. Are they likely to hunt the resident koalas?
This is really interesting. So there's actually a diet study that was carried out in northern New South Wales recently. I think last year they published their results. And they collected the scats from dingoes in 2 national parks, including ones that had koalas in them. And they found no evidence from those scats that dingoes were eating and or hunting and consuming koalas. So that suggests that in general koalas are not threatened by the presence of dingoes. However, at the same time, if the habitat is really poor and koalas are having to use the ground a lot, or are sick or injured, then they may be at risk from dingoes. That's part of the natural
If they're
process
down on the ground,
of a predator, you know. I guess the thing is that if the habitat is poor quality because humans have been cutting down trees, then obviously that's something that humans are causing, and then making them more vulnerable to vehicle strike or predation by dingoes or other predators as well.
So we've got to watch ourselves, not the dingoes on that one.
In general.
In general.
I think, you know, obviously predators are going to eat something that's available to them. And in areas where there's lots of koalas, there may be certain dingoes that might feed on them. But in general, the science says they don't generally eat dingoes.
It's not
koalas.
Typical prey.
No.
We've kind of covered this, so if there weren't any dingoes, would the thylacines still be extinct on the mainland?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that. We don't really know what would have happened. We certainly know that they were in decline, a serious decline for a long period of time. And it's unlikely that those things that were causing them to go into decline were going to change dramatically. Dingoes probably put additional stress on them, and that may have been the final nail in the coffin of thylacines on the mainland. And in Tasmania, definitely humans were the cause of the extinction of thylacines.
Yeah, definitely. So Mel on Facebook would like to know, why should dingoes be protected and what role do they play in Australia's ecosystem?
So first off, dingoes should be protected because they're a native animal. Under Australian legislation, dingoes are classified as a native animal because they were present before 1400 AD. So
amazing,
that's it. Cool. And, you know, they're a naturalised predator. So yes, their ancestors may well have come from outside of Australia, but as I said before, they've adapted to the Australian ecosystems and environments, and the Australian ecosystems and environments have adapted to them. And as the apex predator, they now play a really important role as this top level predator that balances ecosystems, manages the large herbivore populations like kangaroos, and that has flow-on effects through the whole ecosystem. So in areas where you don't have dingoes, you might have lots of kangaroos, and then you're going to have more woody types of shrubs. You're going to have different shaped sand dunes, different quality of soil bacteria and nutrients, and that all impacts things like small native marsupials and rodents and reptiles. If you have poorer quality habitat because there's this whole ecosystem flow where dingoes have been removed, then that means that some of those small animals are going to have less habitat to hide themselves in from predators, and therefore there are going to be less of them.
Wow, so it really is like a big flow-on effect to
it can be. It does seem to be. And there's been a lot of ecologists that have studied this by looking at ecosystems on either side of the dingo fence. So looking at what happens when we have dingoes in the environment versus where we don't have dingoes in the environment. And they found these really large patterns where in areas without dingoes, you have lots of kangaroos, you have less grasses and more hard shrubs, less habitat for small marsupials, you have less of these small critical weight animals, and yeah, the ecosystems in general are just less healthy and less resilient as well.
Yeah, okay, so dingoes, important, should be protected.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention as well, they're really important culturally to First Nations people as well. So I think there's sort of three main reasons why we need to protect dingoes. So, you know, legislatively, they are classed as a native animal. Scientifically and environmentally, they play a really important role. And then culturally as well, they play a really important role for many First Nations people, and that should be valued, acknowledged and respected.
100%, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's brilliant. Kim Marie, if dingoes get full protection in Australia, what is going to stop them from getting poisoned if the government still uses 1080 on ferals such as foxes and cats?
Unfortunately, there's very little that would stop 1080 from killing dingoes because it's a non-target specific poison. So if we're going to continue using 1080 poison in the way that we are and we want to protect dingoes, we're going to have to think about ways that we can target that poison to the animals that we want to be targeting, like foxes and cats. So it's more about the dosage and the delivery method as opposed to, at the moment, what we do, which is aerial baiting in national parks with 1080 meat baits. And I think it's important to understand that fox baits and cat baits, they may have a lower dosage of 1080, but they can still kill dingoes, particularly young dingoes. So it's not a negligible impact.
No. And how does 1080 kill dingoes, and you know what other species are affected by it?
So 1080 acts by disrupting the production of energy, so turning food into energy in your body. And so what happens is that means that there's no more energy being created by your body, so the dingo's body, and therefore their organs no longer have enough energy. So they will keep functioning for a while, and when they run out of energy, they'll basically enter a situation where their heart stops or their lungs stop. So that's how 1080 works. It works the same in all animals, all mammals particularly, and so it can kill other native species as well. All animals are going to be affected in the same way by 1080. The difference is that 1080 is particularly toxic to placental mammals like dingoes or foxes and cats, as opposed to marsupials. And so we need less poison to kill them. So that's one of the ways that that delivery system is changed to, you know, minimise the impact to say like paddy melons or possums from the meat baits. But that's basically what you would need to do. And I guess in future, there might need to be a discussion about how we make sure that the baits are targeting the right species. And I think we need to acknowledge that 1080 is used to target marsupials as well. So it's not just a poison that only kills dingoes or only kills foxes or cats. It can be used to kill native animals like possums. So in New Zealand we use 1080 to kill possums, and in Tasmania we kill 1080 to kill paddy melons and wallabies. So it definitely can kill those animals. It's about the delivery and making sure that we're targeting that poison to the animal that we're trying to kill and not impacting other animals when we're using it.
And what are some of those other animals? Would it be, you know, quolls or other kind of...
So in the case of dingo baits, it's more likely to be carnivorous animals, obviously, because it's meat-based baits. So that would be like goannas, possibly quolls. I think in general, those animals are not going to be killed by the baits because they have a higher tolerance to the poison, so they can have more of it. But it's a situation where if you had too many baits available to those animals, they might consume too much and die.
And that's just...
And also,
really
not dying is probably a low bar.
We
probably want to have situations where we're not impacting those animals at all.
Because even if they're not dying,
they might be
get
more
sick,
vulnerable to
they'll
predation. They might, you know, not be as good parents or have issues with fertility. We don't really understand some of those things.
Yeah.
And I guess that's definitely something that should be considered when we're talking about 1080 baiting in the landscape and what are we baiting and what for.
Sure. Yeah. Lee Mullen says, people say dingoes are just dogs because they can breed with domestic dogs and produce fertile offspring. Wolves can do the same, but we don't call them dogs. What is your take on that?
It's a really good question. And I agree with Lee that dingoes are not the same as domesticated dogs, even though they can breed with domesticated dogs. I think something that a lot of people may not realise is that all canids, so wolves, coyotes, jackals, dogs, dingoes, they can all interbreed together. They can have fertile offspring together as well. And so hybridization between these different species or animals is a challenge for them. And that doesn't mean that when we have jackals that are hybrids or wolves that are hybrids that we don't call them wolves or don't call them jackals.
Yeah.
So I think it's appreciating and understanding that animal lineages may be different from each other but still be able to reproduce together. And just because they can reproduce together doesn't mean they do reproduce together.
Yes.
So when my research looks at hybridization in dingoes around Australia, what we find is that in general, dingoes are not reproducing with domesticated dogs. And so you have to ask the question, if they're not reproducing together in the bush, then are they the same thing or not?
Yeah.
And my response is they're not. Other people might have different opinions about that.
Yeah, interesting. And then Shez Good says that she has noticed that foxes were not in the bush where dingoes were regularly seen, but many foxes were found around farms in the same area. Do dingoes predate on foxes, or do the foxes maybe stay away because of their smell?
So I think it's both things. So certainly dingoes do predate upon foxes. There have been instances of people finding the dead fox with the dingoes. In fact, I was on a field trip where we were tracking some dingoes in the bush and we smelled something really dead and we thought, what could that be? And we were kind of sick in our stomachs because we were a little worried that it might have been one of the dingoes that we were tracking. And we got into the bush a bit and we realised that it was a dead fox. And the pack of dingoes was actually just hanging out around the dead fox.
Oh.
Later we went back and collected that carcass of the fox and we measured the wounds that were on it. And we identified that it had been killed by the dingoes. So they were obviously teaching the younger ones, this is what a fox is and this is what we do to it.
Yeah,
it was really interesting. So yes, dingoes do predate upon foxes, but foxes are also likely to avoid the area where dingoes are, particularly if they're marking.
Yeah.
You know, they're a smaller canid, so similar family or same genus, family, whatever. So they're similar, and so they respond to each other's territorial signals. That doesn't mean foxes are never going to be in places where there are dingoes, but it just means they're going to be a little bit more cryptic and careful. And so you might not see them as often if they're a little bit worried about whether they might encounter a bigger predator that might eat them or just chase them away.
Yeah. So do you think that, like, this circumstance that you saw, would they have eaten the fox, or was it more of like a get out of our territory or just a training? Like, do you have a theory?
I don't think they were going to eat it because it was well past the date
eating.
It was really disgusting.
Past the best before.
It was several days old probably. I think it was more teaching them what it was and what they did. And certainly in that area where we study the dingoes, they don't find as many foxes. And I think that that's a general pattern that you see. I'm not saying that it's completely uniform across all of Australia, but in areas where you have healthier dingo populations, you often have lower densities of foxes, and sometimes you also have lower densities of cats. And that's because of this sort of interspecies competition and suppression that larger predators have on smaller predators.
So we can almost, to an extent, thank dingoes for helping manage some of our feral population.
Yeah, suppress them.
Yeah,
they're not like
them.
removing them from the environment, but definitely they are playing a role in minimising their impact in some places.
That's good.
It is.
Tori would like to know, do dingoes mate for life, and what is their social hierarchy like?
So dingoes do mate for long periods of time. I wouldn't say for life necessarily, because if one of their mates dies, they might, get a new mate.
Yep.
But they do mate for long periods of time, and they have a really strong social hierarchy. So there will be a dominant breeding pair, a male and a female, and there will be subordinates that will hang out with them, and generally those subordinates are last year's pups, or perhaps even 2 years ago's pups, helping to stay and raise the next year's pups. So they have a really beautiful social structure that's sort of like a family group living together. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so, after they've kind of stayed home for a year or two, will they kind of go off and find their own mating partners? Do they establish a new group?
I think mum particularly might say it's time for you guys to shoot off and
shuffle on,
go away, particularly if the younger females are starting to, get to that age where they're wanting to reproduce, because generally dingoes don't reproduce in the first year. They're capable of doing it, but they generally don't. They would reproduce more second year. And so when the younger females get to that age, the dominant one's gonna say,
just like,
go
off
away,
you go,
off you go. I'm the boss here.
Yeah.
This is the same sort of situation that you have with other socially monogamous canids like wolves or coyotes. To a lesser extent coyotes, but particularly wolves and jackals as well, where they maintain these family structures, and then last year's pups may stay and help hang out and look after the new pups.
Amazing. That's really cool. And so when they kind of move on, they don't join other groups, they'd like find each other and form a new one? Do we know much about that?
I mean, they might join another group if one of the dominant partners is really old or injured or, sick, something like that. There may be territorial scuffles, and you may have a dispersing individual, so an individual from one pack going to a new one and successfully entering it. Obviously, that is really important for gene flow and population health. But there's also the instance of dispersing individuals sort of meeting up with another animal of the same age and going off and finding a new territory.
Wow, that is so interesting. So intricate little social lives.
Yeah, of course.
Amazing. And we're on our last question. This is from Gracie. She wants to know, where does the name dingo come from?
So the name dingo comes from an Indigenous word for camp dingo that was used in the Sydney area when Europeans first came to Australia. So they basically didn't get it quite right. I think it was actually tingo instead of dingo, but the Europeans started using the word dingo to describe dingoes.
Dingoes.
But there are lots of Indigenous names for dingoes all around the country. So Wilka is used for the dingoes in the Big Desert and Narcat area. Warrigal is one of the names as well, used in the Sydney region. So there's lots of different traditional names for dingoes, and I would invite you to go and talk to the traditional owners in your area and find out more.
Amazing. It's so good to learn like the Indigenous words from your area, so that, just get that bit of cultural knowledge is important. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Well, that is everything. We've had a question come in from YouTube.
Okay.
Sorry, Shane, almost missed that one. How would Kylie advise farmers in the humane way of living with dingoes?
Right.
I think I read that. How would you advise farmers live alongside dingoes humanely?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question because there's no solution that's going to work for every farmer. It depends on what sort of farming you're doing, what sort of livestock you have. In general, I think that farmers should employ measures to protect their livestock from dingoes first, like non-lethal ones. So that might be putting up electric fencing or predator-proof fencing to put a barrier up between dingoes and your livestock. It might be using livestock guardian animals that are really effective at protecting livestock. So that could be dogs or donkeys.
Donkeys?
Yes, donkeys.
That's
apparently.
Cute.
Yeah. And also using things like changing the way that you're managing your farm. So it might mean moving to cattle instead of having sheep, or putting sheep in internal paddocks where they're more protected versus the cattle in the outer paddocks. Or it might mean moving your sheep that are going to have their babies into paddocks that are more protected or closer to the homestead so that you can monitor them more carefully and ensure they're protected. Might mean making sure you're removing carcasses so you're not drawing any or encouraging any predators to come into the area. So there's a range of non-lethal tools that you can use to try to manage the impact of dingoes. And then after that, if you continue to have a problem, I guess I would advise using targeted control measures. So that means employing a trapper or a shooter that's going to come out and monitor the population and identify, hopefully, the dingo that's causing the issue and removing that animal from the population. I guess the idea with doing baiting, it's really popular, but it can be an issue because what you're doing is you're removing a whole bunch of the dingoes from the area, including the dingoes that may not have been causing any issues for the farmers. And then you're going to have an influx of new animals into the area, and those animals may cause just as much problem. In fact, they may be causing more problems than that dingoes that were there already. So I guess it's sort of balancing that, trying to limit the impact that the dingoes are having on your livestock, but also limit the disturbance to the local dingo population so that you can maintain a stable pack structure and live in harmony with them. Although that's not always going to work because
it's worth a shot.
Dingoes are predators.
Yeah, gotta live with that. Okay, that is now all of our questions. Thank you, Shane. So thank you so much for joining us, Kylie. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Also wanted to give a quick shout out to the South Australian Museum, who is currently showing the Nature Photographer of the Year exhibition, and this gorgeous dingo picture is part of that. So the exhibition's been extended to January 5th, 2025. So if you're in SA, if you're in Adelaide, be sure to check it out. I also just want to say that this is going to be our last episode of Ask an Expert. So thank you all so much for joining us for the past few months. It has been an absolute pleasure. We hope you've learned a lot. And a big shout out to my team. We've got Charlie, Lysiane and Roxy, who have all been absolutely incredible putting this together. But do not worry, there is still so much Australian Geographic goodness to go around. So follow us on socials, check out our website and keep following our YouTube. There's going to be so much more good stuff to come. Until then, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as always.